I came into inheritance of Mom's cabin only to discover it barbed wired by our power-seeking HOA president, who's taking properties for his underground development plan. But he didn't realize he just declared war on the state mayor herself. What would you do when your own community attempts to take what belongs to you? Oh, no, 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 I cried, almost spilling my coffee mug. A woman in a blue business suit was pounding a giant red sign on Grandpa's cabin. Our cabin now, Mom had just inherited it last month, and we hadn't even gotten a chance to finish moving in her stuff. I ran outside, heart racing. Excuse me, what are you doing to our property? The woman spun around like I was disturbing something extremely important. Her name tag said, Mrs. Winters, HOA, Compliance Officer. This cabin violates ship's No 8 rules of Pine Harbor Springs. She said, looking at her clipboard. The roof is wrong. The color is wrong. That old boat should not be seen from the street, and don't even get me started on these wildflowers. I gazed at Grandpa's small wooden rowboat. He'd painted it bright blue when I was 10. The wildflowers were Mom's favorite. There must be some mistake, I said, attempting to keep my voice steady. This cabin has stood for 60 years. It was built prior to any homeowners association being in place. Mrs. Winter smiled, but not in a friendly way. Rules are rules. When your mother acquired this property, it became under the guidelines of our current standards. She gave me a binder so thick that it could stop a bullet. You have 14 days to correct everything or risk daily fines. As she walked to her shiny white SUV, I saw a man on the other side of the street taking photos of our cabin with some high-end camera. My stomach churned. Something did not feel right about this entire situation. I immediately called Mom. You won't believe what just occurred. Slow down, Alex. Mom replied. Her voice sounded exhausted. Being mayor of the entire state meant she was always fixing someone's problem. Tell me right exactly what occurred after telling me all of that. I waited for her to say, don't worry. Instead, she sighed heavily. I was dreading this. The Pine Harbor HOA has been making trouble for decades. They've run off 3 families on our street alone with their wacky rules and fines. But that's not right. Can they actually do that? Technically, yes. Mom conceded. When property is sold, many grandfather protections are lost. But don't worry, I'll call some people. Just don't sign anything or pay any fines until I arrive this weekend. I spent the next 3 days browsing through that awful binder. Some rules were sensible, like keeping the yards clean, but others were just silly. Houses could only be painted from an approved color list. All dull beiges and grays, no gardens in sight from the street, no cars parked overnight outside, no bikes or toys left lying around. It seemed like they wanted to eliminate all evidence that real people lived here. Friday night, I was raking leaves when a friendly voice shouted, "You must be Mayor Morgan's kid." An older gentleman with a golden retriever stood beside our fence. I'm Jack from 2 doors down. Don't let winter frighten you. She singles out all of us, knew why I inquired. Leaning on my rake, Jack glanced about prior to talking more softly between us. Something fishy's transpiring. The HOA began purchasing homes last year. They are especially keen on lakefront cabins, such as yours. My flesh crawled. Why would they be interested in our cabin? I do not know. But Gerald Thompson now heads the HOA. He also owns Big Pine Development. Curious coincidence, don't you think? Before Jack could utter more, Mrs. Winters seemed to pop up out of nowhere. Mr. Barnes, she said icily to Jack, your dog is off leash again. That's number 3 this month. Jack's pleasant face hardened. We're on private property, Elizabeth. The sidewalk isn't private property, she snapped, then turned to me. I hope you're correcting those violations. The fines start Monday after she went out, Jack murmured. Beware, she's Thompson's son's right hand. They're not strict. They're after specific properties like yours that night. I lay awake. I rummaged through Grandpa's old records in the attic and discovered the original property deed back in 1962. There was no reference to any homeowners association. I also uncovered something interesting. Our cabin rested on property that literally joined the lake to the highway. If a person wanted to construct something large with lake access, our property would be the ideal entrance. Saturday morning, jarring knocking woke me up. I staggered to the door to discover 3 men in identical polo shirts with Pine Harbor HOA logos, inspection time. declared the tallest one, already forcing his way past me into the cabin. "Wait, you can't just come in. This is private property." They ignored me, spreading out across the cabin, taking photos and writing notes on tablets. "Kitchen non-compliant," one yelled out. "Bathroom fixtures old," said another. "Living room, furniture visible through windows." The third chimed in like it was a crime to do so. "Get out." Mother's signature. They exchanged nervous glances and suddenly couldn't leave fast enough as they ran to their van. I overheard the tall one grumbling. "Thompson said this would be easy. I called Mom right away. I'm 2 hours from here," she said, her voice hard with rage. "Alex, photograph everything. If they sign my name, we're talking about outright fraud." Waiting for Mom, I walked the boundary, taking pictures of our cabin from all sides. That's when I saw something disturbing. Recently installed survey stakes marked a road slicing right through our land, from the main road straight to the lake. Just as I'd suspected, Jack showed up at the fence again. "Those stakes weren't there yesterday," he said softly. "Thompson making his move." "What move? What's going on?" Jack gave me a creased newspaper page. "See for yourself, it was announced this morning." The headline read, "Luxury Resort Coming to Pine Harbor. Big Pine Development Guarantees. Economic Boom." The architectural sketch displayed a gigantic resort complex, constructed precisely where our cabin and some others happened to be located. My jaw fell as I pulled into the driveway of our cabin. "What in the world?" I whispered, not believing my eyes sharp. Twisted metal glinted in the sunlight, barbed wire entwined around our whole property. A giant red sign on our front door screamed "Major Violation" in big letters. You could read from 50 feet away. This couldn't be real. I blinked hard, but the barbed wire stayed something out of a prison, never a lakeside community of family cabins. I rushed to get my phone in shaky hands. "Mom, they've absolutely lost their minds. There's actually barbed wire like cattle wire all along our cabin." "Barbed wire?" Mom's voice shattered with incredulity. "That can't possibly be legal." "Photograph everything. I am calling our lawyer right now." I walked the property, recording the wire from every direction. Each weathered barb seemed to mock our family's 60 years of quiet living here. How had become a battleground. A truck pulled up, and Miguel, our renovation contractor, got out, looking as shocked as I was. "What happened here?" he asked, getting out slowly. "I was going to start replacing the roof shingles today." "The HOA has lost their minds," I explained, gesturing toward the notice. "Can you even legally work with this barrier?" Miguel slowly shook his head. "Sorry, but I just can't." "Not with this." He handed me an officially looked document. "They dropped this on my desk yesterday. It's a cease and assist order, signed by Gerald Thompson himself. States that I'll personally be fined $500 daily if I perform any work without their permission." My blood boiled. "They can't do this. We already had county permits." "Don't supersede HOA rules," Miguel explained patiently. "I've experienced it in other neighborhoods before. They make it impossible to fix it up, then ticket you for not keeping up your property. It's an ugly trick." As we were chatting, a silver Mercedes arrived. Mrs. Winters alighted, holding her ever-present clipboard. Her eyes widened in pretended worry when she saw us. "Oh dear, you weren't supposed to notice this." But she said, her voice laced with insincere sweetness, "We tried calling first." "Why is there barbed wire fencing around our property?" I asked. "Safety measure," she said smarmingly. "Abandoned homes tend to draw troublemakers." "Abandoned? We were just here last weekend. Our contractor was to begin work today." Mrs. Winters referred to her clipboard. "Your renovation design was rejected by the architectural committee yesterday. This cabin has 17 unresolved infractions. No work can continue until they're taken care of." Miguel whispered that I should leave. "I can't pay those penalties." He gripped my shoulder sympathetically and drove off. Mrs. Winters smiled tightly. "The HOA board will hear your case at next month's meeting. Until then, the property is marked as non-compliant." "Next month, that's 4 weeks from now. Rules are rules," she said, turning away. "Oh, and there's an immediate $100 daily fine on the violations there." I stood unable to speak as she left in her vehicle. The fines alone would total into thousands before the board met. Just then, Jack dashed across the street, glancing nervously about. "I'd seen what they'd done," he said softly. "This isn't so much about the rules anymore. This is about pushing you out. But why I inquired, queried combating back tears of anger. Jack pulled a crumpled paper out of his pocket. See this map from the town hall meeting last evening? Thompson shared more information regarding his resort project. The map indicated a luxury complex across the whole lakefront with a majestic entrance road, cutting straight through our property. All cabins on this road have had the same treatment. Jack clarified the Johnsons, neighboring them, already sold after their fines totaled $155,000. The Garshes on the other side of the lake are struggling for closure. Proceedings initiated by the HOA. A shiver ran down me. They're systematically pushing individuals out to pave the way for Thompson's resort, precisely. And your mom's cabin is the linchpin. They are shell companies attributed to Big Pine Development as we conversed. I saw a black SUV with tinted windows pass slowly by the cabin. They're spying on us, I whispered. They spy on everybody. Jack confirmed Mrs. Winters has her spies all around the neighborhood. Last month, she snapped photos through my windows under the pretext of documenting violations. That evening, I remained at the cabin in spite of its condemned state. I couldn't bring myself to leave it unguarded. At midnight, headlights crept across my bedroom wall. Facing outwards, I observed two men inspecting our property line with flashlights. I shot video from the window in silence as they drove new survey. Stakes our property line inward by several feet at daybreak. I called the county recorder office the moment they opened. I need to confirm the official boundaries of 42 Lakeview Road. Now the clerk sounded. Bore, those records were just revised yesterday afternoon. My heart sank. Revised. How precisely property lines were altered according to a recent survey ordered by the Pine Harbor Homeowners Association. Couldn't believe it. They can't simply alter property lines without owner's agreement. The documents indicate agreement from, I heard typing, a Gerald Thompson registered as property manager. My hands shook with anger. He is not our property manager. Sorry, but the forms look like they are correct. If there is a problem, you'll have to submit an official appeal. After hanging up, I called Mom again. Her aide answered to say that the mayor had been in emergency budget meetings all day, desperate for help. I went to the county building department. The clerk there, a sympathetic older woman, frowned seriously when I read her the situation. This isn't the first grievance against Pine Harbor. HOA, she confided, dropping her voice. But most people just give up and sell because battling is more expensive than it's worth. I'm not selling, I insisted. Then you'd better hire a good attorney, honey, and watch your back. Tom's son has contacts in high places. When I came back to the cabin, the barbed wire had been strengthened with padlock chains on gates. A new notice threatened that unwanted entry to abandoned property would cost trespassing charges. I remained in my vehicle gazing upon my childhood summer house, now cocooned with metal thorns, and understood that we were engaging in something infinitely more sinister than petty neighborhood dictates. This was systematic, methodical theft employing the weapon of bureaucracy. My phone beeped with the arrival of a text from Mom coming tomorrow morning. Do nothing until I arrive. Don't sign anything too late for signature warnings. They already were forging them. I remembered Grandpa constructing this cabin board by board. Mom showing me how to swim in the lake, family barbecues on the deck. He had handmade. I wouldn't let Thompson destroy 60 years of family history for his luxury resort. As darkness descended, I observed more cars. Driving around slowly, they were stalking, waiting for us to quit. You chose the wrong family to mess with, I told him, pulling out my laptop to begin documenting all that had occurred. Mom wasn't just any property owner. She was the state mayor with the ability to initiate investigations, and Thompson had no clue what was in store for him. Cameras flashed as I pushed through the crowd. Gathering outside the Pine Harbor Springs Community Center, every neighbor within 5 miles had shown up here tonight. My heart pounded against my ribs as I held fast to the folder of pictures of the barbed wire encasing Mom's cabin. Are you going to let them get away with this? A white-haired man demanded, grasping my arm. They pushed my daughter out last year with fabricated violations before I could answer. The doors opened. I had never seen the community center. So crowded, people filled the walls, whispered in corners, and glared at the long table where 5 HOA board members sat like judges on a trial. Gerald Thompson tapped his microphone, his silver hair perfectly coiffed in spite of the summer heat. Welcome to the monthly Lakeside Community Association meeting, he proclaimed with practiced flair. We have several properties in default to talk about tonight. Mrs. Winters rushed from Rouse, distributing color packets when she came upon me. Her smile did not live up to the cold eyes. You might want to look at what everyone's seeing, she whispered. The packet was filled with 20 pictures of Mom's cabin each, with big red circles and violation numbers painted on them. And they'd zoomed in on peeling paint, took photos of the garden from unsightly angles, and even took photos snapped through our Windows First agenda item. Thompson made the vacant house at 847 Lakeview Drive. My hand shot up. It's not vacant. My mom owns that cabin. Thompson's eyebrows went up in mock surprise. The owner hasn't acted on 17 separate violations notices because you're shipping them to an outdated address. I got up with the barbed wire photos high, and this is how you react by encaging our property as a prison? Whispers spread around the HOA. A woman behind me spoke under her breath. They can't do that, can they? That's not possible, I said, my voice trembling. Now you can't just appropriate somebody's personal property, really. Mrs. Winters stood her finger pointing to a paragraph in the Book of Rules. It's very precise in section 47B that abandoned houses, the back doors creaked open with a bang. Every head turned. Mom stood in the doorway, her blazer pressed despite the 6-hour journey she'd have had to take to get here. The state seal glinted the fluorescent light as she proceeded down the center aisle. She did not glance at me. Her eyes were on Thompson. I think she spoke, her voice bearing with ease. We should debate the illegality of barbed wire installations without the permission of property owners, not to mention trespassing, photographing from windows and property seizure attempts. The room went so silent I could hear the air conditioner humming. Thompson's face lost all its color as he saw her. He shuffled papers, fumbled his pen, and finally found his voice. Madam Mayor, he stammered, we didn't know this was your property. Would it make a difference if it wasn't? Mom asked, setting her briefcase down on the table with a loud thud that caused Mrs. Winters to jump. Because from my office's initial investigation, this isn't the first time your HOA has come after properties with dubious violation. Claims a man in the back stood up. They took my mother's house last year, said her bird feeder broke 6 regulations. My garden was proclaimed a native speciation. Violation, yelled another lady. Thompson pounded his gavel frantically. Order this meeting will keep things in line. Mom unbuckled her briefcase. The things I have knowingly brought are interesting, she said, pulling out an enormous property map. Would anyone care to see how all properties confiscated during complaints received over the last 3 years just so neatly coincide with the intended luxury development plans submitted with the county by Thompson Enterprises? The room erupted, people pushed forward, screaming questions. Thompson's face went from white to red as he pounded his gavel repeatedly. Mrs. Winters moved back toward a side door, but 2 members of the community blocked her way. This meeting is adjourned, Thompson yelled, standing to leave. Sit down. Gerald ordered, a voice. I didn't know a woman in a sheriff's uniform came in through the same door Mom had walked in. We have some questions regarding HOA, fund misappropriation that just can't wait. As Thompson leaned back in his chair, Mom caught my eye for the first time and gave me the slightest of winks. The battle had just begun. But for the first time since seeing that barbed wire, I felt hope flicker to life. What none of us realized was how desperately Thompson would fight to protect his secrets, and how far he'd go to silence his rain pounded against the cabin windows as I paced across the creaky floorboards. 3 days had passed since the explosive HOA meeting, and Pine Harbor Springs buzzed with rumors. My phone rang nonstop with messages from neighbors sharing their HOA horror stories. You have to see this, called Mom from the kitchen table, where piles of papers formed a maze around her laptop. Her otherwise perfect hair was tied back in a disheveled ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. I looked over her shoulder at an email from her office. What am I reading? Thompson's company history. He doesn't merely construct high-end complexes, she explained, touching the screen. He purchases failing HOAs, alters the bylaws, then pushes out property owners whose homes he desires. A knock on the door startled us both. I leaned over the window to behold a woman in a rain-drenched jacket grasping a badge. Investigator Maria Rodriguez, she declared when I opened the door. State Attorney's Office, the mayor requested that we assist. Mom greeted her with a weary smile. Thank you so much for coming so soon. Rodriguez shook water off of her jacket and set a thick folder on our table. We've been monitoring Thompson Enterprises for months. Your cabin was the missing link. She poured papers across the table in front of our coffee mugs. Thompson's development business bought the Lakeside HOA management contract just 3 years ago. She said, gesturing to a page of signatures. Since then, they've taken over 12 properties through made-up infractions. My stomach turned over. 12 families had lost their homes, all strictly legal on paper. Rodriguez scowled. The HOA bylaws had been rewritten soon after Thompson had come on board, granting the board unprecedented powers. Most homeowners never even read the revisions. Another knock stopped us this time. It was Jack, our neighbor, drenched to the bone and sporting a waterproof envelope. Sorry to block out, he told me, water splashing on our welcome mat. But you gotta view what I uncovered. Jack was a retired land surveyor before that. He spread wet pages across the single clear spot on our table. I've been documenting property taking since they attempted to track me down for my birdhouse hide a year ago. They're making a corridor for utilities and access roads without paying fair market value. Rodriguez took photos of Jack's maps with her phone. This changes everything. We need witness statements from everyone who lost property. I've got a list. Jack nodded. Several neighbors are willing to talk now that someone's finally listening. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by thunder that shook our windows in that bright moment. I noticed a shadow move across our front yard. Someone's out there, I whispered. We killed the lights and watched a hunched figure darted between trees, moving closer to the cabin. Mom reached for her phone to call for help when a crash shattered our silence. Glass exploded across the kitchen floor as a rock smashed through our window. Rain and wind rushed into the room, scattering our papers. Rodriguez drew her weapon while Mom pulled me away from the broken glass. Everyone all right? Rodriguez asked, slowly approaching the window. Jack grasped the rock with a handkerchief. There was a note rubber banded to it: back away or worse is yet to come. He read out loud. Mom quietly took a broom and started sweeping pieces of glass. They've just taken this from unethical to criminal, she said, her voice firm, but her hands shaking slightly. Menacing a state official is a felony. Rodriguez holstered her gun and got out her phone. I'm calling for patrol units to monitor the property. While Rodriguez made the call, I got Mom's laptop and opened up the security camera app. We'd installed cameras after discovering the barbed wire. Let's see who our late-night visitor was. We gathered around the screen, rewinding the footage through the rain. A familiar figure appeared, face partially hidden by a hood. That's Mrs. Winters, Jack exclaimed. Thompson's right-hand woman. We watched her approach the cabin, throw the rock, then hurry back to a car waiting on the road with its lights off. Keep watching, Rodriguez said, pointing to the screen. The footage continued. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Winters returned, this time heading to Jack's mailbox and a few others on our street. She was inserting papers in every single one, more violation notices. Jack guessed I need to review those. Rodriguez said, don't touch them, but gather them as evidence in the morning. I sent the video to Rodriguez's email. There's something else we should examine. I said, pulling up footage from nights ago. Hours of searching uncovered a trend we never anticipated in the last week. Mrs. Winters made at least 15 visits to houses in our neighborhood, always at night, always leaving papers in mailboxes or snapping photos of houses. The conspiracy is broader than we ever guessed, Mom said softly. They're not only after our cabin, they're methodically constructing cases against every house that gets in their way. As dawn burst into the rain clouds, Rodriguez's phone rang, her face clouded over as she listened. We have to move fast, she said after hand. Thompson just filed emergency documents to condemn 5 lakefront properties, including this cabin. He's alleging structural damage from last night's storm creates imminent public hazard, but there's no damage other than the window his partner shattered. I protested. Rodriguez collected her notes. Thompson doesn't know we have footage of Mrs. Winters. He's ramping up his scheme because he's afraid. Mom stood up, weariness vanishing from her face. Then we need to ramp up ours. Jack, round up everybody who's been impacted, Maria. We need a judge for emergency injunctions prior to Thompson being able to file those documents as they hurried to make calls. I gazed at the shattered window rain still spraying through the jagged gap. What had begun as a simple cabin inheritance had exploded into something that would alter all our lives, forever and somewhere out there. Thompson was plotting his next move. Would we be prepared for it? News vans lined the street in front of the large state building where Mom would give a speech today. My hands trembled as I adjusted my tie in the car mirror. All our efforts gathering evidence against Thompson and his HOA bullies boiled down to this moment. Ready, Mom squeezed my shoulder, looking serene in her official mayor coat with shiny buttons. People with cameras hurried toward us as we ascended the stairs. Madam Mayor, is it true? The HOA surrounded your property with barbed wire, a reporter yelled. Mom just smiled and continued walking inside the hearing room, hummed with whispers. I spotted Jack waving from the back table, giving me a thumbs up. Thompson sat at the front table with four attorneys in suits that cost more than my house, looking like he was the boss. This hearing will come to order, announced Judge Williams, banging her wooden hammer. We're here to probe supposed abuses by the Pine Harbor Springs Homeowners Association. Mom stood holding our family photo album and a pile of papers. My son and I uncovered something very alarming. She started with her voice forceful but pitiful. The HOA that is led by Mr. Thompson isn't safeguarding our community. It's appropriating homes. Whispers filled the air as she presented maps which had red rings around all Thompson's houses. Stolen each confiscated landforms an avenue for his covert luxury scheme that would lay waste to our safeguarded wetlands. Thompson's face grew red. Those charges are inexcusable. We just enforced community standards that homeowners had committed to uphold. Really? Mom pushed a button and a large screen displayed pictures of our barbed wire cabin. Is this standard community practice, Mr. Thompson, holding a property in jail without court authorization? The judge leaned forward, scowling. I've never seen such extreme measures from an HOA. That's when something magical happened. Mrs. Winters, the same neighbor who originally threatened us, stood up behind Thompson, her face pale and terrified. I have to tell her, she said, voice shaking. Everyone turned to look on Thompson, spun around. Sit down, Eleanor. No, she walked slowly to the front, fingering her purse. I can't lie anymore. The room fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Mrs. Winters pulled out a tiny silver USB drive. These are recordings of our confidential HOA meetings. Thompson explained to us what houses to target. Houses that blocked his development strategies. He forced us to plant bogus infractions. Thompson leapt up so quickly, his chair slammed back. You signed documents vowing to remain silent. He bellowed, charging at her security personnel. Restrained him as Mrs. Winters stepped back. He threatened to take my home if I didn't assist him, she went on, tears streaming down her face. I'm not alone. Half the HOA board was blackmailed. Other neighbors I knew stood up in the room. Nodding order, the judge pounded her hammer over and over again. Mr. Thompson, control yourself or be ejected. Thompson's attorney whispered frantically in his ear, but Thompson shook him off. This is a setup. The mayor is playing hardball against me. The recordings will show for themselves, Mom said calmly, although I could see her, knuckles whitening around her pen as the first recording played. Thompson's voice filled the room. Target the blue cabin next. Once we seize enough properties along the lakefront, we'll have our access road. The old regulations won't matter once we control the whole area. A security guard LED Thompson out as he shouted back at us. You have no idea what forces you're messing with. This goes higher than you think. His words made my stomach twist with worry. What did he mean by forces? Who else was involved that evening? Walking to our car, Jack rushed up with his laptop. Alex, look what I found. Searching through county records, Thompson's company isn't the only one involved. There's a shell corporation that owns part of his business, and guess who runs it? He turned the screen towards me. My jaw dropped when I saw the name. This was larger than we could have ever dreamed at the time. Mom's phone rang. Her face turned white as she listened. They've done what. She stared at me in shock. We have to get to the cabin immediately. Flames illuminated the night sky as we came around the bend to Mom's cabin. My heart almost stopped. Fire trucks filled the narrow road, their red lights whirling across the trees. No, no, no. I leaped from the car before it came to a stop. A firefighter halted my progress. Stay back, sir. It's not safe. That's my family cabin. I gestured desperately. Mom raced up alongside me, flashing her official badge. Chief Martinez walked towards us. Madame Mayor. I'm sorry, someone cut the power cables to generate sparks. This was intentional. Mom's face turned cold. Did you salvage anything? We managed to contain it mostly to the back section. The front porch and main room survived. He hesitated. We found this nailed to a tree. He handed Mom a note that read, "Drop the investigation," or "Next time we won't miss Jack," appeared hugging his laptop to his chest. I was checking the property when I smelled smoke. I called 911, then grabbed the biggest thing he held aloft. Grandpa's tin box of family pictures we'd stored on the mantel. Mom hugged him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." News crews showed up within minutes of being told instead of hiding. "Mom stepped forward tonight. Someone attempted to silence us by way of destruction and fear." She spoke to the cameras, her voice firm in spite of her trembling hands, "But they don't get it. What this cabin means, it's not just nails and wood. It's 3 generations of memories, and now it's evidence of how far corrupt officials will go to cover up their misdeeds." That interview changed everything. By morning, our story had gone national. My phone rang nonstop with messages from journalists and supporters from all over the country who'd experienced similar HOA abuses. "Alex, come see this." Jack called from the half-bured living room where he'd established a temporary workspace. "Remember that shell company name I brought up? Show you, look who just got busted." He turned his tablet to reveal breaking news. Senator William Vaugh being led out of volunteers in carting and coffee. "I feared to lose my house," she clarified while assisting in the installation of new windows. "Thompson discovered I was in arrears after my husband passed away. He said he'd write off my debt if I assisted target some of those properties, including ours," I explained. She nodded sheepishly. "I never thought how far he'd resort when they installed that barbed wire." I knew I couldn't remain quiet on a drizzly Tuesday for months following the fire. The state attorney phoned Mom. I saw her face light up as she listened. When she hung up, she danced me around the newly completed kitchen. "They have S.E. Thompson's assets. The judge ordered that all the people who lost property through his scheme receive compensation, and in addition, the HOA is dissolved officially." That weekend, we invited the entire neighborhood for a cabin warming party. People who'd once shunned each other now chatted like old friends on our new wraparound porch. "What happens if we don't have an HOA?" asked former board member Mr. Jenkins, who looked nervous about enforcing the rules. Jack, who'd become our de facto community organizer, grinned. "We're creating something new. A neighborhood support association, no mandatory fees, no property seizures, just neighbors helping neighbors. Keep homes nice, share tools, and keep our natural spaces intact. I'd like to assist Mrs. Winters," provided quietly. "I know what not to do." People laughed, tension at last breaking as twilight descended over the lake. I sat down with Mom on Grandpa's refurbished bench beside the water. The cabin behind us radiated golden light and laughter. Half original, wood half new, stronger than ever. "Look what you constructed," I said beside her. "What we constructed," she refuted. "I couldn't have defended them without you." A ripple on the water caught our eye as an otter family frolicked along the shore. Wildlife coming back now that Thompson's construction plans were forever halted. The Wetlands Protection Order takes effect tomorrow. Mom told us that no one can ever develop here again. Jack sat with us sipping 3 mugs of hot cider. Senator V's replacement is pushing for new laws against predatory HOAs, they're calling it. The Pine Harbor Protection Act. Mom told us that no one can ever develop here again. Jack sat with us sipping 3 mugs of hot cider. Senator V's replacement is pushing for new laws against predatory HOAs. They're calling it the Pine Harbor Protection Act. I smiled watching lightning bugs blink on and off above the water. Grandpa would be proud. His cabin not only survived, it changed lives, not just the cabin. Mom said, squeezing my hand, "Standing up when it counts. That's what makes a difference." As darkness fell completely, neighbors gathered around our new fire pit, sharing histories of their own homes and aspirations for our town's future. The first time ever, there were no property lines between us. No regulation on fence height or paint shade. Just individuals who found out what community truly meant. I gazed around at these faces once unfamiliar. Now, dear friends, and realize something significant. Sometimes what appears to be an end is actually a new beginning. Our battle wasn't just about rescuing one cabin. It was about creating trust again amongst neighbors who had lost their sense of community. And that was every fight we had worth.